"You don't have to do this," he muttered, staring at the slice of pie she paid for with her last tips. The waitress didn't answer. She just slid the plate closer, her fingers trembling, her eyes tired but unafraid. Outside, rain hammered the window like accusation. Inside, a man worth billions sat hungry, invisible, and suddenly exposed. He thought this disguise would reveal who truly cared. He didn't realize it would reveal who was being tested. Because when the truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't break her heart the way he expected. It would shatter his. The raindrops on the window of the penthouse suite at the Dorchester didn't look like rain. They looked like diamonds sliding down the glass. Inside, the air smelled of expensive oued wood and freshly pressed Egyptian cotton. Zay al-Hassan stood by the window staring down at the sprawling grey labyrinth of London. At 32, he was the acting CEO of Al-Hassan Oil and shipping a conglomerate that practically powered half the Middle East. He had the jawline of a movie star and the bank account of a small nation. He checked his Rolex Daytona, the Platinum Edition, worth more than most people's houses. 7 p.m. Sir Zane didn't turn around. He knew it was Kasim, his head of security and lifelong friend. "Is the car ready?" "The Bentley is downstairs, sir. Lady Catherine is expecting you at noon in 30 minutes. Zane sighed, his breath fogging the glass. "Cancel it, sir. Lady Catherine is the daughter of the Duke of... I know who she is, Kasim." Clears throat. "She's the woman who spent our entire last date asking about the horsepower of my yacht and whether I knew the Sultan of Brunei personally. I'm bored." Zane turned, his dark eyes flashing with a restlessness that had been consuming him for months. "I'm bored of the script, Kasim. Everyone reads from the same script. They see the name, they see the watch, and they smile that fake, predatory smile." Zane walked into his massive walk-in closet. He bypassed the rows of Tom Ford suits and Italian silk shirts. He reached into the back, pulling out a duffel bag he'd prepared weeks ago. He pulled out a faded, oversized grey hoodie, a pair of jeans stained with engine oil and boots that had seen better decades, let alone days. Kasim's eyes widened. "Sir, you cannot be serious. The board meeting is tomorrow. If the paparazzi catch you looking like a vagrant..." "That's the point. The paparazzi don't look at vagrants. Nobody looks at poor people, Kasim. They look through them." Zane stripped off his silk robe and pulled on the rough, scratchy denim. It felt uncomfortable, tight in the wrong places, and smelled faintly of damp storage. It felt real. "I'm going for a walk. No guards, no Bentley, no tracker." "Your father will have my head," Kasim said, panic rising in his voice. "I'll be back before midnight. I just need a reality check." Zane took a beanie, pulled it low over his dark hair, and slipped out through the service elevator, bypassing the glitz of the hotel lobby. The London air was biting. The rain wasn't diamonds anymore. It was cold, wet misery. Zane walked for blocks, leaving the wealthy embrace of Mayfair and drifting toward the grittier streets of Soho. He had walked these streets 100 times in a limousine. Walking them in boots with a hole in the sole was a different universe. People didn't part way for him. A businessman shouldered him into a puddle without apologizing. A taxi driver honked and swore at him for crossing too slow. He was invisible. It was liberating. By 8:30 p.m., the novelty had worn off and hunger set in. He patted his pockets empty. He had left his wallet, his phone, and his black Amex in the penthouse. He truly had nothing. He spotted a small flickering neon sign, the Rusty Spoon Diner. It looked tired. The windows were steamed up and the red paint was peeling. Perfect. Zane pushed the door open. A bell chimed weakly. The warmth hit him, smelling of frying bacon, stale coffee, and floor cleaner. The place was mostly empty, save for a trucker in the corner and a couple arguing in a booth. He sat at the counter, keeping his head down. "We don't do handouts, mate." The voice was sharp, nasal, and unwelcoming. Zane looked up. A man in a grease-stained shirt, name tag reading Derek Manager, was leaning over the counter sneering. "I just want some water," Zane said, his voice raspy. He pitched it lower, hiding his Oxford-educated accent. "Water's for paying customers." "You got money," Derek demanded, looking Zane up and down with disgust. "Look at the state of you. You're dripping on my floor." I left my wallet." Zane improvised. "Yeah, likely story. Get out before I call the coppers." Zane felt a flash of anger. The kind of arrogance that came from being a billionaire who could buy this building and demolish it within an hour. He opened his mouth to put this man in his place to tell him exactly who he was speaking to. "He's with me." The voice was soft, melodic, but firm. Zane froze. He turned his head. She was standing by the service hatch balancing a tray of dirty dishes. She couldn't have been more than 24. She had messy auburn hair tied back in a hurried bun, and her uniform was 2 sizes too big. But it was her eyes, hazel-tired and incredibly kind, that stopped him cold. "Casey, don't start," Derek snapped. "This guy's a bum. He's a human being, Derek, and it's raining." Casey set the tray down and walked over to the counter. She didn't look at Zane with pity. She looked at him with solidarity. "I'll pay for his coffee and a slice of pie." "It's coming out of your tips, Jenkins." Derek spat, turning his back to scrub the grill aggressively. "And you barely have enough to cover your bus fare as it is." Casey ignored him. She poured a mug of steaming black coffee and slid it towards Zane. Clear's throat. Then she plated a slice of cherry pie. "Eat," she whispered, offering a small, tired smile. "It's not the Ritz, but the cherries are fresh." Zane stared at the pie. He had eaten desserts prepared by Michelin star chefs in Paris, dusted with edible gold. But this slice of pie paid for by a waitress who was being threatened by her boss looked like the most valuable thing he had ever seen. "You don't have to do this," Zane said, his voice genuinely thick with emotion. "I can't pay you back." Casey wiped her hands on her apron. "I didn't ask you to. My mom always says, if you have more than you need, build a longer table, not a higher fence." She laughed, a self-deprecating sound. "Not that I have much of a table, but I have enough for a coffee." She touched his hand briefly. Her skin was rough, calloused from hard work. "I'm Casey." "Zane," he said, omitting his last name. "I'm new in town looking for work." "Aren't we all?" She sighed, looking at the clock. "Eat up, Zane. Derek's bark is worse than his bite, but he will kick you out if you loiter after closing." Zane took a bite of the pie. It was too sweet, and the crust was soggy. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. For the next 2 weeks, Zane lived a double life that was slowly tearing him apart. By day, he was Sheikh Zayed Al Hassan, negotiating a multi-billion-dollar pipeline deal with the Norwegian government, signing contracts in boardrooms made of glass and steel. He wore suits that cost more than Casey's annual salary. By night, he was Zane the Drifter. He would have Kim drop him off 3 blocks away from the Rusty Spoon. He would rub dirt on his face, mess up his hair, and walk into the diner at 900 p.m. sharp. He learned everything about Casey Jenkins. He learned that she worked double shifts 6 days a week. He learned that she walked with a slight limp when it rained because she couldn't afford physiotherapy for an old ankle injury. He learned that she loved old jazz records but didn't own a record player. But mostly, he learned about her struggle. One Tuesday night, the diner was quiet. The rain was hammering down again. London's eternal soundtrack. Zane was nursing the same cup of coffee he had been drinking for an hour. Casey sat opposite him in the booth, looking exhausted. There were dark circles under her hazel eyes. "You look like you're carrying the world, Casey," Zane said softly. She rubbed her temples. "Just bills, Zane. It's always bills. My landlord, Mr. Henderson. He raised the rent again another £50 a month. It doesn't sound like much, but it's everything when you're on the edge," Zane finished for her. He clenched his fist under the table. £50. He had tipped a valet £200 earlier that day just for bringing his car around quickly. The disparity made him feel sick. "And then there's Mom," she whispered, looking out the window. "Her medication isn't fully covered by the NHS anymore. They switched brands and the new one makes her sick. The private prescription is astronomical." How much, Zane asked too quickly. Casey looked at him confused. "Why, you can't help, Zane. You're in the same boat as me. I might know people. Odd jobs. I just like to know the numbers. 2,000, she said, her voice cracking. £2,000 for a 3-month supply. I have 300 in my savings jar. Zane felt a burning in his chest. He could pull out his phone, transfer the money to the pharmacy instantly, and solve this problem. He could buy the pharmacy. But he couldn't. Not yet. If he revealed who he was now, the magic would break. She would look at him differently. She would see the checkbook, not the man. He needed to know if she liked him, or if she would just be grateful for the savior. It was a selfish thought, and he hated himself for it. But he had been burned too many times before. Something will turn up, he said lamely. Good things happen to good people. Casey laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. You're a dreamer, Zane. I like that about you, but the real world eats dreamers for breakfast. Just then, the door swung open. A gust of wind blew napkins off the counter. A man walked in. He wasn't a customer. He was tall, wearing a cheap leather jacket and smelling of stale cigarettes. He scanned the room and locked eyes with Casey. Casey went pale. She stood up so fast, her knee bumped the table, spilling Zane's coffee. Gary! She gasped. What are you doing here? My money, Casey. The man said, his voice loud. You said Tuesday. I said next Tuesday, she pleaded, stepping out from behind the booth. Please, Gary, not here. Derek will fire me. I don't care about your job. I care about the 500 quid your deadbeat brother borrowed before he skipped town. Gary grabbed Casey's arm. Zane's vision went red. The transformation was instant. The posture of the broken homeless man vanished, replaced by the predator stance of a man who commanded armies of lawyers and security guards. Zane stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't yell. He spoke with the quiet, terrifying authority of the Al Hassan bloodline. Let go of her arm. Gary turned, sneering at Zane's dirty coat. Sit down, unless you want a matching set of black eyes. I said. Zane stepped closer, towering over the thug. Let go now. Gary laughed and shoved Casey backward. She stumbled, hitting her hip against the counter with a cry of pain. That was it. Zane moved with a speed that shocked everyone. He caught Gary's wrist, twisting it with a precise military relock that forced the man to his knees, screaming, "You touch her again," Zane whispered into Gary's ear, "and you will pray for the police to find you before I do." He shoved Gary toward the door. The thug stumbled, clutching his wrist, looking at Zane with genuine fear. There was something in Zane's eyes. A coldness that didn't belong to a homeless man. It was the look of a man who had ended careers with a signature. "You're crazy," Gary yelled, backing out the door. "I'll be back." The diner was silent. Derek was staring from the kitchen, mouth open. Casey was trembling, holding her arm. Zane's adrenaline crashed. He realized what he had done. He had broken character. A homeless man doesn't fight with that kind of training. He turned to Casey, his heart hammering. "Are you okay?" She looked at him, her eyes wide. She wasn't just scared of Gary. She was looking at Zane with a new, intense curiosity. "Who are you, Zane?" she whispered. "Who are you really?" I learned to fight in foster care." He lied, the words tasting like ash. "You have to be tough to survive on the streets." Casey studied his face for a long second. She wanted to believe him. Clear as throat. She needed to believe him. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. She reached out and hugged him. Zane froze. She smelled of vanilla and cheap soap, a scent better than any Chanel perfume he'd ever smelled. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight against the dirty wool of his coat. "I won't let anything happen to you, Casey," he vowed. "I promise." But promises were dangerous things when they were built on a foundation of lies. Outside, in the shadows across the street, a camera shutter clicked. A paparazzo who had been tracking the missing billionaire for days checked his display screen. The image was grainy but undeniable. The billionaire Sheikh Zain Al Hassan, dressed like a beggar, hugging a waitress in a run-down diner. "Jackpot," the photographer muttered. Zain didn't know it yet, but the clock on his double life had just run out. The next morning, London woke up to a grey drizzle. But Zain al-Hassan woke up with a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He lay in his king-sized bed at the Dorchester, staring at the ceiling. The fight with Gary the night before had been a wake-up call. He couldn't keep lying to Casey. The way she had looked at him, confused but trusting, made his stomach turn. He had to tell her. Qasim Zain called out, sitting up. "Get the car ready. The real one. I'm going to the diner." Qasim appeared in the doorway, his face pale. He held a tablet in his hands as if it were a bomb. "Sir, I don't think you should go outside." Zain frowned, swinging his legs out of bed. "Why is it the board?" "Tell them I'm sick." "It's not the board, sir. It's everyone." Qasim walked over and silently placed the tablet on the bed. Zain looked down. It was the homepage of the Daily Mail. The headline screamed in bold black letters. "The billionaire beggar Sheikh Zain al-Hassan caught slumming it with waitress in Soho." Below the headline was the photo. It was grainy but unmistakable. It showed Zain in his dirty coat, holding Casey in the middle of the diner. His face was turned just enough to be identified. The caption read, "Is this a sick game? The heir to the Al-Hassan fortune plays dress-up while the rest of London struggles." Zain felt the blood drain from his face. "No," he whispered. No. It's viral, sir," Qasim said quietly. "Twitter, Instagram, the news channels, they are camped outside the hotel." And Qasim hesitated. "They are camped outside the diner." Zain stood up so fast the room spun. "We have to go now." "So security advisors, I don't care about security. She doesn't know." Zain grabbed his keys, ignoring the suit Qasim had laid out. He pulled on a t-shirt and jeans, expensive ones this time, and ran for the door. The scene outside the Rusty Spoon was chaos. Usually the street was quiet at 10 a.m. Today, it was a circus. Vans with satellite dishes clogged the road. Photographers were climbing on dumpsters to get a shot through the steamed-up windows. Casey was inside, trapped. She had arrived for her shift at 8 a.m., unaware, clear's throat, of the storm. When the first reporter banged on the glass, asking, "How much did he pay you?" she thought it was a prank. Then Derek had turned on the TV. Now she stood behind the counter shaking. She looked at the TV screen above the grill. There was a file photo of Zain in a tuxedo at a gala in Monaco, looking imperious and wealthy. Beside it was a photo of Zain the drifter, the man she had fed, the man she had worried about, the man she had bought coffee for with her last few pounds. They were the same man. The door chime rang, but it wasn't a customer. The crowd parted as a sleek black Mercedes SUV mounted the curb, scattering paparazzi like pigeons. Zain jumped out. He wasn't wearing the disguise. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and dark sunglasses flanked by two massive bodyguards. "Casey," he shouted, pushing through the mob. "Mr. Al-Hassan, is she your mistress? Did you lose a bet, Sheikh? Is poverty a fetish for you?" The questions were like knives. Zain ignored them, bursting through the diner door. The bell chimed. The diner went silent. Derek was cowering in the kitchen. Casey stood by the cash register. She looked small. Her apron was stained with coffee. She looked at Zain, the real Zain, and her expression wasn't anger. It was devastation. Casey Zain stepped forward breathless. "Please let me explain." Casey laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Explain. Explain what exactly that you own the oil company my mom can't afford gas from, or that you've been laughing at me every time I counted my tips." "I never laughed at you," Zain pleaded, reaching out. "I wanted to know. I wanted to see if someone could see me. Not the money, just me. See ya?" Casey's voice rose, trembling with tears she refused to shed. "You think this is a game? You think my life is a costume party?" She reached under the counter and pulled out a small crumpled brown paper bag. She threw it at him. It hit his chest and fell to the floor. "That's the sandwich I made you for later," she choked out. "I skipped my own lunch today so I could make it for you because I thought you were hungry. I thought you were starving." Zain looked at the bag. He felt smaller than he ever had in the dirtiest alley. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he whispered. "You didn't just hurt me, Zane. You made me feel like a fool. You sat there and watched me cry about my rent. You watched me stress about my mom's medicine. And you sat on a pile of gold and said nothing." She wiped her eyes furiously. "To you, being poor is a vacation, a break from your stressful life of luxury. To us, it's every single day. We don't get to take off the costume." "I can fix it," Zane said desperately. "I can pay for everything. Your mum the rent? I can get out," Casey said. "Casey, please get out," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Take your money and get out of my diner. I don't want a savior. I wanted a friend, and you're neither." Derek popped his head out of the kitchen, emboldened by the cameras flashing through the window. "You heard her. Get out, mate, before I sue you for trespassing." Zane looked at Casey one last time. She had turned her back to him, her shoulders shaking. He realized then that no amount of money could fix the silence in the room. He had broken the one thing he couldn't buy: trust. He turned and walked out into the blinding flash of the cameras. The flight from London to Dubai usually took 7 hours. For Zane, it felt like 7 years. He sat alone in the main cabin of his family's private Gulfstream jet. He hadn't touched the champagne the stewardess had poured. He was staring at his phone, scrolling through the comments on the articles. Another rich brat mocking the poor. Waitress should sue him for emotional distress. He looks good in rags, though. Hello. He threw the phone across the cabin. It hit the leather seat opposite him with a dull thud. When the jet touched down in the heat of the UAE, the reception was not warm. A convoy of black armoured cars was waiting on the tarmac. Zane was driven straight to the Al Hassan estate, a sprawling palace of white marble and gold leaf surrounded by lush, impossible gardens in the middle of the desert. His father, Sheikh Ahmed Al Hassan, was waiting in the main Majlis meeting room. The sheikh was a man of iron tradition. He sat on a raised dev, sipping tea, looking at an iPad. "You have made us a global laughingstock," Ahmed said, without looking up. "I was just trying to find something real, father," Zane said, his voice tired. Ahmed looked up, his eyes hard. "Real? You are a sheikh. Your reality is responsibility. Your reality is the thousands of employees who depend on our stock price, which, by the way, dropped 4% this morning because investors think the CEO is having a mental breakdown." Ahmed stood up and walked over to his son. "You will stay in Dubai. You will attend the Energy Summit next week. You will smile, shake hands, and act like the man I raised. The homeless experiment is over." And Casey Zane asked the girl. Ahmed waved his hand dismissively. "My lawyers are handling it. We sent a non-disclosure agreement and a check for £50,000 to keep her quiet." Zane's blood ran cold. "You did what we paid her off. It's standard procedure." "She's not a standard procedure," Zane shouted, startling the servants. "She won't take the money. You don't know her. Everyone takes the money, Zane. Eventually." Back in London, the rain hadn't stopped. Casey sat at her small kitchen table in her cramped apartment. The envelope from the Al Hassan legal team sat unopened in the center of the table. She hadn't gone to work for 3 days. She couldn't. After Zane left, the media storm had turned ugly. Reporters had dug into her past. They found her father's gambling debts. They found her brother's criminal record. They spun a narrative that she must have known who Zane was, that she was playing the long con to trap a billionaire. Derek had fired her via text message. "Too much drama, Casey. Bad for business. Don't come back." She was jobless. Her rent was due in 4 days, and her mother had called that morning, coughing, saying she had 2 pills left. Casey looked at the envelope. She knew what was inside. Hush money. If she signed it, the rent was paid. The medicine was paid. The debt was gone. Clear as throat. All she had to do was sell her pride and admit that her friendship with Zane was a transaction. She picked up the envelope. Her hands were trembling. She thought about the night Zane, the fake Zane, had fought Gary for her, the way he had held her, The way he had eaten her soggy cherry pie like it was a feast. "If I take this," she whispered to the empty room, "then he was right. I'm just another person waiting for a handout." She stood up, grabbed a lighter from the drawer, and walked to the sink. She held the corner of the envelope to the flame. The heavy, expensive paper caught fire slowly. She watched the Alhassan crest turned to ash. She dropped it into the metal sink and watched it burn until there was nothing left but black dust. She sat on the floor and cried. She had her dignity, but dignity didn't pay for heating. 2 weeks later, Zain was in a glass boardroom on the 81st floor of the Burj Khalifa. Men in suits were talking about oil barrels and shipping lanes. Zain wasn't listening. He was looking out the window at the clouds. Qasim entered the room quietly and leaned down to Zain's ear. "Sir, you asked me to track the payment." "Did she cash it?" Zain asked, bracing himself. Part of him hoped she had, so she would be safe. Part of him hoped she hadn't, so she would still be the woman he admired. "No," Sir Qasim whispered. "She burned it." Zain turned his head sharply. "She burned it. According to our surveillance, yes. And sir, there is more. She was evicted yesterday. Her landlord didn't want the press around the building." Zain felt the air leave his lungs. "Where is she?" "She is staying at a hostel in Hacken." "It is not a good place, sir." Zain stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. The board of directors stopped talking and looked at him. "I have to go," Zain said. "Sit down, Zain," his father said from the head of the table. "We are voting on the merger." Zain looked at his father. Then he looked at the city below, a city built on ambition and money. He realized he had spent his whole life building towers, but he had never built a home. "Vote without me," Zain said. He adjusted his tie. "I have a debt to pay, and it's not to the bank." He walked out of the boardroom, leaving $3 billion of business on the table. Zain said, striding down the corridor. "Fuel the jet. To London, sir. To London. And Chasm. Yes, sir. Call the real estate team. I want to clear his throat by a building. A specific building." Zain didn't just want to say sorry. He was done playing games. He was going to war for her, whether she wanted him to or not. Hackney at 2 a.m. was a different world from the polished marble of Dubai. The air smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. Casey sat on the edge of a thin-stained mattress in a communal dorm room. The hostel was loud. Someone was coughing 3 bunks over, and the sound of police sirens was a constant pulse in the distance. She clutched her backpack. Everything she owned was inside it. Her mother was in a care facility now funded by the last of Casey's meagre savings. It was a cold clinical place, but at least it was warm. Casey, however, was down to her last 20 pounds. "Is this it?" she whispered to herself. She had tried to find work, but her face was too recognizable. Managers at other cafes would look at her then, at their phones, and shake their heads. "We don't want the cameras here, love," they'd say. Zain's game had effectively blacklisted her from the only life she knew. Suddenly, the heavy steel door of the hostile lounge swung open. The night manager, a man who usually didn't look up from his tabloid paper, stood up straight. "Can I help you, sir?" 3 men in charcoal suits entered. They looked like they belonged in a government briefing, not a 30-a-night hostel. One of them, a man with a sharp beard and a kind but professional gaze, scanned the room. It was Qasim, Casey Jenkins. Qasim asked, his voice echoing in the drab room. Casey stood up, her heart hammering. "If you're here to give me more money to sign those papers, you can leave." "I'll burn the next ones too." Qasim bowed his head slightly. "I am not here for signatures, Casey. Someone is waiting for you outside. He says he won't leave until you hear him out. He's been there for 4 hours. Casey looked towards the window. Down in the street, parked haphazardly against the curb, was a lone black SUV. Not a convoy, not a parade, just one car. Standing beside it, leaning against the hood with his arms crossed, was Zain. He wasn't wearing the rags. He was wearing a simple black coat and a scarf. He looked exhausted. Casey grabbed her bag and marched downstairs. She pushed through the heavy doors and stepped into the cold night. "Go away, Zain." she said, her voice cracking. Zane didn't move. I can't. I tried. I went back to Dubai. I sat in the meetings. I looked at the gold walls, and all I could think about was that you were sleeping here because of me. It's not because of you, she lied. It's just life. It is because of me. I broke the world for you, just to see if I could fit into yours. It was the most selfish thing I've ever done. He stepped closer, his breath blooming in the cold air. I didn't come to give you a check, Casey. I know you'll just burn it. I came to show you something. I don't want to see your palace, Zane. It's not a palace. Please, 5 minutes. If you want to leave after that, I will personally drive you back here, and I will never speak to you again. I give you my word as a man, not a shake. Casey looked at him. The billionaire was gone. The beggar was gone. Clear as throat. Standing there was just a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Against her better judgment, she got into the car. The drive from the hostel to Soho was conducted in a silence so thick, it felt like a physical weight between them. Zane sat behind the wheel of the SUV, his hands gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel at 10 and 2, his knuckles white. He didn't look like a man who had just won a victory. He looked like a man heading toward a firing squad. Beside him, Casey stared out the window watching the neon lights of London's nightlife blur into long streaks of electric blue and crimson. She felt like she was in a dream or a nightmare, where the man who had been her confidant was replaced by a stranger with a jawline like granite and a car that cost more than the street she grew up on. Zane didn't take her to a luxury hotel. He didn't take her to a fancy office. He pulled the car to a sharp stop in front of a familiar boarded-up storefront in the heart of Soho. The Rusty Spoon. The closed sign was still hanging crookedly in the window, taped there by a bife. The neighborhood had turned on Derek, the former manager, after the news broke that he had physically threatened a man who turned out to be one of the most powerful people in the world. The diner was a ghost of its former self, a hollowed-out shell of grease and memories. Why are we here, Zane? Casey asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and rising fury. Is this some kind of sick victory lap? You wanted to show me that you could buy the place where I used to scrub floors. Zane didn't answer immediately. He reached into the center console and pulled out a heavy brass key. I don't want to talk on the sidewalk, he said quietly. Please. Inside, the diner was freezing. The power was off, but the street lights outside filtered through the grime on the windows, casting long dramatic shadows across the checkered floor. Zane walked over to the counter, the same counter where Casey had once served him a soggy slice of cherry pie, and set a thick cream-colored folder down. I bought the building, Zane began, his voice echoing in the empty space. Not just the diner, the entire 4-story structure. I bought out the commercial lease, the residential units above us, and the land it sits on. Casey let out a harsh, jagged laugh. Of course you did, because that's what your people do, isn't it? When a toy breaks, you just buy the factory. Did it feel good, Zane, writing that check? Did it make you feel like the big man again? I didn't buy it for me. Casey, Zane said, stepping closer, though he kept a respectful distance. And I didn't buy it to be a landlord. Open the folder. Casey hesitated, her hand hovering over the heavy paper. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, the stamps of the Royal Courts of Justice, and the bold black ink of the signatures. She reached a paragraph highlighted in yellow, her breath hitched. The document stated in no uncertain terms that the title deed for 42 Soho Lane had been transferred. It wasn't transferred to Alisson Holdings. It was transferred to Casey Rose Jenkins. What is this? She whispered, the paper shaking in her hand. It's yours, Zane said. The building is yours. The 3 apartments upstairs are currently vacant, but they are renovated and ready to be rented. The income from those units alone will bring in nearly £10,000 a month. It's enough to put your mother in the best private care in England. It's enough to make sure you never have to work a double shift for a man like Derek ever again. Casey looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. You think you can just gift me a life? You think you can hand me a building, and that makes us even, that it erases the weeks you spent lying to my face? No, Zane said, his voice cracking. It doesn't erase anything. I know that. I know that to you, I'm just another rich man trying to buy his way out of a guilty conscience. But Casey, listen to me. I spent my whole life being told that money was the only thing that mattered. I believed it. I thought that by pretending to be poor, I was being noble. I was wrong. I was playing a game with your reality. He took a step towards the window, looking out at the street. You gave me a coffee when you had nothing. You defended me against a man who could have hurt you. You treated me like a human being when I was dressed as someone the rest of the world ignores. I didn't buy this building to save you. I bought it because it's the only way I know how to return the dignity I stole from you when I turned your life into a headline. I can't take this, Casey said, shoving the folder back toward him. It's too much. I don't want to be a charity case. It's not charity. Zane snapped, his old authority flickering for a second before softening into desperation. It's a debt, Casey. A debt of honor. If I keep this building, it's just another asset on a balance sheet. If you keep it, it's a future. It's a home. It's the diner you always talked about opening. The one where the food is fresh and the people are treated with respect. Casey looked around the dark, dusty room. She, clear as throat, could almost see it. The boards coming off the windows, the smell of fresh paint. A place where she was the boss. A place where her mother could sit in the corner and never worry about a pill count again. Why are you really doing this, Zane? She asked, her voice a low whisper. Is it because you love me or because you pity me? Zane looked at her, and for the first time the billionaire, Clear's throat mask, was completely gone. He looked vulnerable, stripped of his titles and his wealth. I don't think I'm allowed to love you yet, Casey. Not after what I did. And I could never pity you. I've never met anyone stronger than you. He backed towards the door, leaving the key and the folder on the counter. The lawyers have already filed the paperwork. It's done. You are the owner of 42 Soho Lane. You never have to see me again. I'm leaving for Dubai tomorrow to settle my affairs and step down from the company. I'm going to try to be the man you thought I was when I first walked in here. He opened the door, the cold London air rushing in. Goodbye, Casey, he said. He stepped out into the night, leaving her alone in the middle of a dark diner that was now hers. She stood there for a long time, clutching the folder to her chest, caught between the life she had lost and the empire she had just been handed. The London fog had a way of blurring the edges of the world, making the past feel like a dream, and the future feel like a ghost. For Casey Jenkins, the last 12 months had been a blur of blueprints, health inspections, and the grueling, beautiful work of transformation. Soho had shifted around her. New boutiques had opened, and old pubs had closed, but the corner of 42 Soho Lane stood as a testament to resilience. The peeling red paint of the rusty spoon was a distant memory. Now the exterior was clad in deep forest green wood with polished brass accents that caught the dim London light. The neon sign no longer flickered with the uncertainty of a dying business. It glowed with a steady warm amber light that simply read the table. Inside, the atmosphere had been reborn. The heavy, suffocating scent of stale grease and chemical floor cleaner was gone, replaced by the sophisticated, comforting aroma of artisanal sourdough bread, roasted garlic, and fresh rosemary. Casey stood behind the counter, but she was no longer the girl in the oversized, stained uniform. She wore a tailored slate grey apron over a simple cream dress. Her auburn hair was pinned back neatly, and her movements were no longer dictated by the frantic fear of a manager's temper, but by the calm confidence of a woman who owned every square inch of the floor beneath her feet. In the sunniest booth by the window, Casey's mother sat comfortably. She wasn't coughing anymore. Her skin had regained its colour, and she spent her afternoons lost in classic novels. Her private medical care funded entirely by the rental income from the apartments Casey now owned upstairs. It was a life Casey hadn't dared to dream of during those cold nights in the hostel. Casey had kept her promise to herself. She hadn't sold the building for a quick profit. Instead, she had turned the table into a community anchor. Half gourmet bistro for the midday business crowd, and half charity kitchen where every evening those struggling on the streets could sit down to a meal served with the same dignity as a paying customer. She had become a local hero, though she avoided the press with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. She knew better than anyone how easily the media could turn a life into a circus. And in all that time, 365 days, she had not seen or heard from Zain al-Hassan. She followed the news, of course she couldn't help it. His name was everywhere, but the context had changed. The tabloids that once mocked the billionaire beggar were now forced to report on the al-Hassan reform. He had officially stepped down from the board of his family's oil conglomerate, a move that had sent shockwaves through the global economy. He had traded his penthouse at the Dorchester for a modest flat in South London and spent his time travelling to disenfranchised neighbourhoods, not to build pipelines, but to build sustainable housing through his new foundation. It was 3:00 p.m., the golden hour in the diner when the lunch rush had faded and the dinner prep hadn't yet begun. The street outside was quiet. Casey was cleaning the steam wand of the espresso machine, lost in the rhythmic hiss of the water. The bell above the door chimed. It was the same weak, tiny sound it had always made, the one thing she refused to fix. "Be with you in just a second," Casey called out, not looking up. "Take your time," a voice replied. The world seemed to stop spinning. The milk frother hissed to a stop, and the only sound left was the ticking of the clock on the wall. That voice was different now. It wasn't the Oxford-polished arrogant tone of the sheikh, nor was it the forced raspy growl of the drifter he had pretended to be. It was a grounded, honest voice, the voice of a man who had finally found his own skin. Casey turned slowly. Zain stood by the door. He wasn't wearing a $5,000 suit, and he wasn't wearing oil-stained rags. He wore a simple navy wool sweater, dark chinos, and boots that looked like they had actually seen some miles. He looked older. There were faint lines of exhaustion and wisdom around his eyes. But the restlessness that had once haunted his gaze was gone. He looked at Peace. "I heard the cherry pie here was the best in London," he said softly, his voice wavering with a hint of nerves. Casey wiped her hands on her apron, her heart hammering so loudly she feared he might hear it across the room. "The crust isn't soggy anymore," she whispered. "I actually went to culinary school for a few months to make sure I got it right." Zain walked towards the counter. He didn't sit in the Billionaire booth or hide in a corner. He just stood there looking at the vibrant, successful woman she had become. "You did it, Casey. You built the longer table. I had a little help with the real estate," she said, a small, guarded smile playing on her lips. "I've been keeping a ledger, Zain. I have a year's worth of rent checks sitting in my office. I was going to send them to your foundation, but I didn't want to break the silence." "Don't send them," Zain said, stepping closer. "If you do, I'll just donate them right back to this kitchen. I'm done with the money dance, Casey. I realized that the more I tried to fix things with a checkbook, the further I got from the truth. Then why I hear, are you looking for a partnership for the foundation?" Zain reached into his pocket. Casey braced herself, half expecting a diamond ring or another legal document. Instead, he pulled out a small, yellowed and incredibly crumpled piece of paper. It was the original receipt from her first charity coffee, the one she had paid for with her own tips a year ago. "I kept this every single day," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I kept it in my wallet to remind me of the only time in my life I felt like I was actually seen. I didn't come here to buy anything today, Casey. And I didn't come here to save you. You've clearly saved yourself." He paused, looking around at the beautiful space she had created. "I came here because I'm moving the foundation's headquarters to the office block 3 streets over, and I realized that I don't want to spend my weekends in a boardroom. I want to spend them doing something that matters. I came to ask if you need an extra set of hands on Saturday nights when the charity kitchen opens." Casey looked at him, cleared his throat, really looked at him. The billionaire and the beggar were gone. Those were just characters in a story he had written to escape his own life. Standing before her was just Zain, a man who had lost his fortune in pride, but found his wealth in purpose. She reached under the counter and grabbed a clean white mug. She poured a coffee, strong, black, and honest. She slid it across the polished wood of the counter. "The industrial dishwasher is temperamental," she said, her voice steady, "and the floors need scrubbing at 10 p.m. sharp. I don't pay much and I don't give special treatment to former royals. Zayn took a sip of the coffee. It was hot bitter and the best thing he had ever tasted. I wouldn't have it any other way. And Zayn, yes, this one isn't on the house. It's £450. You can pay me back by starting on those dishes. Zayn laughed. A real booming laugh that echoed through the diner and finally chased away the last of the ghosts. He walked behind the counter, tucked his napkin into his belt, and rolled up his sleeves. They weren't a billionaire and a waitress anymore. They were just two people sharing a cup of coffee and a long table finally writing a story that was true. Zayn al-Hassan learned the hard way that you can't buy trust and you certainly can't fake a soul. He lost a fortune in time and reputation. But he gained something far more valuable. A woman who loved him when he had nothing and respected him when he finally became someone worth respecting. Casey Jenkins didn't just get a building. She proved that even in a world of billionaires and power plays, kindness is the only currency that never devalues. But what would you do if you found out the person you were helping was a secret billionaire? Would you take the money or would you burn the check? Like Casey did? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that karma always finds its way home. And subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life dramas. Turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss a twist.